Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fueled my continued efforts. You've probably noticed something different. Yes, this voice isn't the same as before because I took a long break. I didn't realize in time that the AI voice I used previously had already been removed from the platform. Of course, I could try using AI voice cloning to recreate the old voice, but after listening to the new options, it feels like the latest AI voices have improved a lot in rhythm and delivery. So let's give this one a try, and I hope everyone can get used to this new voice. In our previous episode, Diablo, empowered by the slime cells, severely injured Feldway. Milim also regained her sanity, and the tide of war finally began to turn around. Yet, at that very moment, Ivarage began to evolve once more into a form no one could have predicted. In this episode, we will turn our focus to Feldway and Dino. With the loss of the Star King dragon Veldanava and Princess Lucia's sacred remains, the direction of the entire Tenma Great War shifted dramatically. So, let's get started. The perspective moved to Feldway. Dragging his near-shattered body, Feldway fled in disgrace back to the Star Palace, using instant motion. Though his flesh had been pulverized by Diablo and the pain was unbearable, reaching the Star Palace brought him a sense of fleeting relief. It was worth noting that only a handful of beings could teleport directly to the Star Palace. Under normal circumstances, the only way in was through the Heaven Tower, which was guarded by Dagruel. But with Ivarage and the cryptid army now disrupting that passage, breaking through the Heaven Tower had become nearly impossible. Theoretically, the Star Palace remained an absolutely safe zone. Staggering toward the throne, Feldway tried to comfort himself. If he could buy enough time, his wounds would eventually heal. Diablo's strength far exceeded his expectations, to the point of being downright unnatural, but Feldway firmly believed he would prevail in the next round. He was convinced he had deciphered Diablo's combat patterns and had also gained insights from observing Yuki Kagurazaka's techniques, particularly how to weave instant motion into real combat. No matter how powerful Diablo appeared, Feldway still refused to acknowledge him as a true threat. Yet, one fear lingered: the demon lord Rimuru. Feldway hadn't yet discovered that Diablo's newfound power came from Rimuru. Instead, it was a simple fear of the slime who had managed to return from the end of space and time itself. An event that defied comprehension. Most importantly, it meant that Feldway's ultimate move, chronosaltation, had completely failed against Rimuru. That skill, which required stacking time stop on top of time stop, had incredibly strict activation conditions, yet Rimuru had brushed it off effortlessly. Muttering to himself, Feldway wished Rimuru had been erased at the edge of time and space. Meanwhile, he pressed onward along the broken corridor, heading straight for the throne. However, when he lifted his eyes to look at the throne, the scene before him nearly knocked the breath from his already disordered chest. The hall was not empty. Dino, Pico, and Gracia, who were supposed to be raiding Ramirez's labyrinth, were casually slouched in the chairs beside the throne. Their laid-back demeanor resembled that of tourists just back from vacation, not commanders in the middle of a war. Worse, they were smirking and commenting on how miserable Feldway looked, joking that he must have taken a serious beating. Feldway, who had already learned of Vega's defeat during his fight with Diablo, clenched his rage and pain, demanding to know whether the trio had come slinking back like beaten dogs just because Vega had lost. But Dino's response made Feldway's blood pressure spike again. He claimed that conquering Ramirez's labyrinth was a mission impossible. Not only Vega, but even the supposedly invincible insect Lord Zalanis had been taken down by Zegion. This was nothing short of devastating. While Feldway had already mentally prepared for Vega's failure, knowing how arrogant and unreliable the man was, he had always regarded Zalanis as his trump card. With existence points surpassing 100 million, Zalanis was a monster comparable to a true dragon. Feldway had believed that even if Vega lost, Zalanis would still be standing, leaving room to salvage the situation. Only now did he realize how naive he had been. Almost instinctively, he asked again whether it was Diablo who defeated Zelanis. Dino corrected him with deliberate emphasis. The one who killed Zelanis was Zegion. It was a thunderbolt out of the blue. Diablo's power was already terrifying enough, and now Rimuru had another monster under his command who could single-handedly kill Zelanis. From this short exchange, Dino, Pico, and Gracia quickly deduced that it was Diablo who had left Feldway in such a pitiful state. Naturally, they couldn't let the chance to mock him slip by. They began praising Diablo's overwhelming strength and debated whether Zegion might even be stronger. They guessed that Zegion must also be near the Genesis class level, and that it would be hard to say who was truly stronger. Diablo, Zegion, and Rimuru, the one who commanded them both, along with Milim and other formidable obstacles standing in the way. The enemies Feldway needed to eliminate to realize his ambitions were growing in number. At this point, he could only rely on how much chaos Ivarage could stir up to determine the next phase of action. However, before Feldway could even process all this information, Dino's aura suddenly changed. The usually sleepy, laid-back fallen angel vanished, replaced by the sharp, commanding presence befitting one of the 7 angels of origin. Dino stared straight at Feldway and stated that the holy remains he had carefully guarded were gone, then asked whether Feldway knew anything about it. Feldway's heart tightened. He whipped around toward the space behind the throne. There stood the door leading down to the underground sanctuary hall. Its material and construction were as sturdy as the outer walls of the Heaven Tower, originally built as an impenetrable barrier against all intruders. Yet now that door had been blown apart. Fragments were scattered across the floor. The staircase descending into the underground lay fully exposed, and inside everything was empty. The sacred coffin, where the bodies of Star King Dragon Veldanava and his beloved wife, Princess Lucia, had been enshrined, was gone. This coffin had been Dino's most precious treasure ever since he recovered their remains, and the number of people who knew it existed was extremely small. It was classified as top-level secrecy. The coffin itself had been infused with Holy Spirit energy, a divine artifact comparable to what Luminous once used to seal Cronoa. It should have been utterly impossible to destroy. Furthermore, Feldway himself had helped construct this domain and had layered its defenses countless times. It was precisely because of its security that Feldway had once placed even his own true body there. Both Feldway and Dino's first suspicion fell on Ivarage. But Dino no longer cared about sparing Feldway's pride. He pointed out directly that this incident was due to Feldway's negligence. If Feldway hadn't lifted the Star Palace's protective barrier, the 2 holy remains could never have been stolen. Feldway had no rebuttal. If Veldanava-sama were to be revived, losing his body would be troublesome. But as an immortal true dragon, he would still be able to regenerate a form from nothingness and return. The real problem was Lucia-sama. She was different. She had been human. Once her body was lost, it meant complete erasure, no possibility of return. What Feldway had been protecting with utmost care all this time were precisely these 2 remains. This was his last lifeline before Veldanava. Even though Feldway believed Veldanava-sama had abandoned him and carried deep resentment that pushed him toward the extreme of wanting to destroy everything, deep in his heart he still yearned for his lord's approval. That was the tragedy of Feldway. Feldway cursed the reckless Ivarage, but Dino did not stop there. He keenly noticed something unusual. The destroyed door didn't look like it had been broken from the outside, but rather blasted from within. Also, the sanctuary hall could only be entered by 2 individuals, Feldway and Velzard. No one else, not even Dino, could access it. Only a short while ago, when Feldway returned to his true body, this place had still been secure. And Feldway, being extremely cautious, would never commit the amateur mistake of forgetting to lock the door. Dino cautiously offered another possibility. What if there was a chance that Veldanava-sama had already revived, and that he had done so during the brief time window between Feldway returning his true body and Ivarage beginning her invasion of Central World, simply because if the door had been blown open from the inside, it meant someone inside had come out. Indeed, while the door was believed to be impossible to break from the outside, its internal structure had relatively weak resistance to impacts from within, because the defensive mechanisms were designed only to counter external threats. Of course, there was another possibility. Perhaps Ivarage had first broken the lock to enter, then caused an explosion on her way out due to losing control of her power. Worse yet, Ivarage might have absorbed the power of the holy remains while inside. But even so, Dino still couldn't completely dismiss the possibility of Veldanava Sama's revival. It wasn't that Dino disliked the idea of Veldanava returning. He simply hoped his speculation was wrong, because reviving at this timing raised way too many red flags. If the world truly were on the verge of destruction the way Feldway wanted, then Veldanava awakening in response would make sense. But Dino's intuition told him things were never that simple. And unfortunately, Dino's bad premonitions had always been extremely accurate, 99 times more accurate than his good ones. For this very reason, Dino intentionally threw out the absurd possibility of Veldanava Sama's resurrection, hoping Feldway would immediately deny it. Feldway felt suffocated, yet he did analyze the situation calmly. First of all, the time window between his return to his true body and the cryptid army's invasion was extremely short. It was unlikely Veldanava would choose that moment to revive. Secondly, if Veldanava Sama had indeed revived, with his personality, he would never remain hidden. He would never allow Feldway to manipulate Milim or attempt to destroy the world. Feldway would have been the first target of divine punishment, even if Veldanava's power had not yet fully recovered. Thus, for once, Feldway and Dino reached a rare consensus. Veldanava Sama most likely had not revived. But based on that assumption, an even more troublesome possibility emerged. Ivarage had devoured the holy remains of Veldanava Sama. Pico and Gracia were the first to say it out loud. If that were true, then the already troublesome evil god Ivarage might have absorbed the powers of both Veldanava Sama and Lucia. Dino could easily imagine how terrifying this would be, and although it made his skin crawl, he still optimistically shrugged it off, saying that, while the situation was indeed terrible, he wasn't the one who would have to clean up this mess. With a casual, "That sounded awful," he dumped the entire problem onto Feldway. As for Feldway, even though this development aligned with his goal of destroying the world, losing control of the situation was unacceptable to him. This meant not only that his plan to revive his lord had completely fallen apart, it also meant they had created, with their own hands, a final evil god that even they might be unable to handle. Dino, meanwhile, returned to his one-of-my-business attitude. He lazily asked Feldway what his next plan was, and this indifference infuriated Feldway. Only then did Feldway realize something. Dino had already slipped out from under the control of his ultimate skill, Lord of Justice. Dino didn't bother hiding it. He openly stated that he, Pico, and Gracia had long ceased being controlled. The three even grinned mischievously and said they were sick of Feldway, and now they were finally free. Feldway's heart was filled with hatred and unwillingness, yet he also understood that these three unreliable fools would never tell him how they escaped his control. After all, the three of them had always been whimsical and uncontrollable. Without ultimate dominion, it had become impossible to force them into obedience. What's more, Dino's group didn't even feel they had betrayed Feldway. In their eyes, the one who betrayed their trust was Feldway, who had trampled upon their free will and manipulated them as he pleased. The trio fired back without hesitation, each taking turns criticizing Feldway, decisively declaring their complete break with him. The reason Dino's group had come here in the first place was simple. They heard that Ivarage had appeared at the Heaven Tower, and they wanted to double-check whether the Star Palace was still safe. Unfortunately, their visit only confirmed Dino's notoriously accurate bad premonitions. The holy remains had indeed disappeared. At this point, regret was meaningless. To Dino's team, the situation was already far beyond their ability to manage. They could only give up trying to intervene. Fortunately, they at least ran into Feldway here, and having the chance to unload years of resentment all at once left the trio feeling unexpectedly refreshed. They no longer placed Feldway in their eyes at all. Now that Rimuru had safely returned to the Central World, the trio openly and fearlessly expressed how much they looked forward to joining the Monster Federation. Then, Dino suddenly remembered something. He casually tossed Feldway a good luck and prepared to leave. Feldway, however, was at his breaking point. To him, the trio's blatant defection was utterly shameless, especially considering their status as ancient, supreme members of the Seven Angels of Origin. Yet they showed no pride and even bowed to a recently born slime. But Dino remained indifferent to Feldway's rage. He casually remarked that it didn't matter how many years one had lived. If those years held no meaning, then they were worthless. What mattered was how one lived, and only a firm will could allow the soul to shine. This line sounded extremely familiar. It was what Rimuru had once told the three primordial demon beauties during their recruitment. Dino even expressed a hint of pity, saying Feldway's eyes had been clouded by obsession, and that it was time for him to reconsider what his original purpose truly was. Before leaving, the trio told Feldway not to do any more ridiculous, world-ending nonsense, and added that they didn't actually dislike him that much. Left alone, Feldway felt nothing but emptiness. He had lost his friends, his companions, and the master he had long pursued was no longer here. Now, even the holy remains had vanished. At this point, it seemed that his only hope lay with the evil god Ivarage. Yet, he wasn't sure whether relying on Ivarage was the right choice. Feldway had long stepped onto a path of no return. The root cause of everything lay within himself. He didn't even have the right to complain. Deep down, Feldway didn't truly believe Veldanava-sama would revive at the moment, which meant there was only one logical conclusion. The holy remains had undoubtedly been devoured by Ivarage. However, Feldway also noticed something else. Dino seemed genuinely worried that Veldanava-sama might have revived. If Veldanava truly revived, then Feldway's goal would have been achieved. But that simply brought him to the real problem, the evil god Ivarage, whom Feldway believed had devoured the holy remains. Even if Ivarage gained the authority of the creator god and became completely uncontrollable, Feldway felt it didn't matter. Because from the beginning his objective had only been to revive his master. Whether controlling Milim or destroying the world, Feldway had only wished for Veldanava-sama to appear, revive, and personally stop him. To Feldway, the worst possible ending wasn't world destruction. It was Veldanava-sama never returning. In a hidden corner of his heart, he already understood that this was the most hollow and despairing future. But just then, Feldway felt a sudden chill. He also knew Dino's bad premonitions had always been right. The fact that Dino was this anxious likely meant Veldanava-sama might really revive. It was foolish humans who killed Veldanava-sama, and Feldway's group had been abandoned for failing to protect their master. Humanity deserved to be purged, and if doing so could contribute to Veldanava-sama's revival, that should have been cause for joy. Michael thought this way, and Feldway agreed. But what if Veldanava-sama's true intention wasn't to prevent the world's destruction? This part was particularly interesting. From the very beginning, Michael and Feldway had done everything possible to revive Veldanava-sama. Feldway hadn't even considered world destruction until he was truly cornered, and it was precisely when he embraced this extreme thought that signs of Veldanava's revival appeared. This forced Feldway to question whether Veldanava's true goal was the destruction of the world. Only now did Feldway realize that he had never truly understood his master's intentions. His murmurs echoed through the empty Star Palace, sounding far louder than he expected. But the place was long deserted. No one was left to answer Feldway's final, ultimate question. All right, that's all for this video. So at the moment, Dino had a vague, uneasy sense that Star King Dragon Veldanava might have revived, and that faint intuition had already cast a shadow over what lay ahead. Feldway had also begun reevaluating his past actions. When he had earnestly tried to revive his master, nothing had happened. Yet the moment he turned toward destroying the world, signs of revival appeared. It almost seemed as though Veldanava's intention was to destroy the world. The author seemed ready to pull off something big in Volume 23, but luckily, we would know the full direction of the story in just a few days. Of course, as TenSura readers, we might be about to see the author's definitive explanation of the relationship between Veldanava and Rimuru in light novel Volume 23, something fans had waited years to finally understand. In our next episode, we would shift perspectives to the battlefield of the Heaven Tower, where Ivarage would reveal his newly evolved form. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.